There is a brand new Volkswagen Atlas and the Atlas Cross Sport, and I think this is a fantastic facelift, both in the exterior but more so in the interior. I think this interior looks absolutely stunning, and I'm gonna let you know why when I compare the old to the new one. So there are a couple of changes, not just to the design but also of course to the powertrain. So you don't have the 3.6 liter V6 engine anymore. Instead, you have one single option when it comes to powertrains, and that is a new turbocharged 2-liter 4-cylinder with 269 horsepower, and that drops it by 10 horsepower from the V6, from the 3.6 V6 that we don't have anymore. Some really cool design changes specifically in the front end, because all models, all Atlases except the base one, now comes with a illuminated logo in the front, and of course you have a light bar in the front and also a light bar in the rear. I feel like Atlas is a little late to the game when it comes to light bars, but I think it looks really good, which we're going to talk about more when we jump into Photoshop. Now in the interior you have a larger 12-inch infotainment screen, which is standard on all new 2024 Atlases, and it also comes with a 10.3-inch digital gauge cluster with a head-up display, which you can option to have in your Atlas. And you also have Apple CarPlay and Android Auto wireless, and also wireless phone charging in the interior standard. And if you're like me, if you have a bunch of miscellaneous electric devices charging in your car, you want to have a lot of USB ports. And if that's you, I think the Atlas will not disappoint, because you get at least 6 USB-C ports in 2024 Atlases. Front-wheel drive is still standard. We can option for all-wheel drive, and pricing is expected to be a little bit higher than the 2023 model, starting at probably around $37,000 to $38,000 for both of these cars. All right, guys, we're in Photoshop, so let's have a look at this refresh. I think it looks fantastic. The old one, you know, I was always a fan of the R Sport model because we didn't have these chrome pieces that we have in the front end, which I can understand that it suits a big SUV to have a little bit of chrome pieces here, but in the old Atlas we had 3 chrome bars, and then we had a little bit of chrome down here at the side. But having it in the R Sport, that completely removes all this chrome, and you have more blacked out features in the front end. I think that looked a lot better, and that also changed this bumper to a much more aggressive bumper that looks pretty similar to the new 2024 down here. This is actually the R line here at the bottom of the new 2024 Atlas, and you can see just how much better it looks having stuff blacked out. I haven't seen the regular Atlas yet, but this feels like a simplified design of what we had in the previous Atlas, while still retaining a super strong brand identity for Volkswagen. And that really helps with the graphics, because now we have that light bar that goes across the entire front end, which really hammers in the nighttime identifier for this front end. And I also like this intake. It looks pretty traditional and nothing crazy going on in the lines and the outlines for this intake. And in addition, we have this mouth at the bottom, creating a pretty solid foundation for the Atlas, even though I might maybe want to have something down here in body color to just have a end point for where the front end ends. But the front end to me looks so much better than the old one. I love that they simplified the graphics of the headlights, and now we have a bigger distance. It feels like the headlights are bigger and taking up more space than they did in the previous pre-facelift, and I think that's true here. And that also suits a big SUV like this. It reminds me a little bit of the Ford Explorer, actually, now that I look at it. So looking at the side view, there's really not a lot going on in the side view when it comes to changes from the previous pre-facelift model. I've always loved this line that we have in all Atlases, because it's such a powerful line that goes all across the entire length of the car, and these bumps kind of symbolizes the 4-wheel drive functionality, but in a stylized way, similar to what Audi has on their Quattro models, the RS5, the A5, and the R8 as well, having the shoulder line kind of dip up over the axles. The Atlas Cross Sport I don't have it here in Photoshop, but I think I'm sure you know I'm not a huge fan of SUV coupes, but I think the Atlas Cross Sport is actually one of the better looking ones because they don't brutally just cut this part and turn it into a coupe when it doesn't work with the rest of the proportions. The Cross Sport actually has more, just similar to this, just more of an angle in the rear, but it's still very boxy in the rear. So that's why I think the Cross Sport is one of the best looking SUV coupes on the market right now. In addition, we have new wheels ranging from 18 to 21 inch, and this being as massive as it is, I'm sure you know which type I would go for. I would definitely choose the 21 inches because I think they will proportionally look the best on this type of proportions. This looks like it's the same R-line like we have in the front end, which now actually has some chrome pieces to it. The old one was all blacked out, even in the rear, but here you can see that we have this piece now being chrome, which I'm not, I could do without this chrome piece. It looks like it's just stuck here and doesn't really have a connection to anything else in the rear end. But the rear end of the Atlas from the pre-facelift to the new one, don't really see a lot of changes, of course, except for one major one, and that is that we now have a light bar in the rear. So welcome to the club, Volkswagen Atlas, adding a light bar into your designs. And I think that was a really good idea because this is a wide vehicle and the light bar just emphasizes the width of this beast and just makes it look wider than what it is. I think it's a perfect addition to the facelift of the Atlas. But they didn't even change the diffuser here, for example, and it did not change anything in the taillight assembly. The LEDs look like they have the exact same shape, which maybe is a missed opportunity. They could have done something cooler like with this and have it be integrated in a nice way still in the light bar. But I think part of it is also to save cost when you do updates like this. So just keeping the taillights probably saves a lot of money. So now looking at this interior, as I've talked about before, I'm a huge fan of when you have a gauge cluster, you have a housing for it and it sits deep in the dash, and that is what it did on the previous pre-facelift Atlas. Up here, as you can see, we have this nice house right here, and then we have a digital gauge cluster, all good, sitting deep in the dash, exactly what I want. And then you have a nice integration here of the infotainment screen in the previous one, but look at what they did with the new one. What I love about this design is how well integrated both the gauge cluster is, but also the iPad that we have on the dash. It's actually a really good integration. Let me show you why. First of all, can we just take a minute to appreciate these materials that we have? This looks super high quality with the wood stretching all the way almost into the gauge cluster here. And what they did with the gauge cluster by having this trim going all the way to this point, they didn't just build a house for the gauge cluster, they made a cave for it because it sits so far in, and we have the same texture going here like we have over here. So it stretches the entire width of the interior. But in addition, look at the integration of the iPad here, the infotainment screen. We have this silver piece going around, and then this also now connects in the bottom vent. So you have the same trim kind of following this line and cutting through this piece, then coming back at the bottom. And these are details that I appreciate as a designer, because it feels now that the iPad is not just stuck on there randomly, it has connections to the rest of the features in the interior, and that's what's going on with this framing of this piece. I think it's beautifully done, and this interior just looks gorgeous to me. So well done, Volkswagen, on the upgrade on the Atlas. I can't wait to sit inside of this and just kind of feel all the materials that's inside of this car.